What is up, everybody? Today we're going to be taking a look at the Moonshiner Role in Red Dead Online, and we're going to try to figure out how historically accurate it actually is. Well, to answer this question, we're going to need to go back in time, and we're going to need to look at the history of moonshining a little bit. During the Civil War, the U.S. government passed the 1862 Revenue Act, which required that all distillers have a legal permit to produce alcohol and levied taxes on all spirits produced. As such, many people began setting up illegal but highly profitable underground distilling operations, where folks could cook, bottle, and distribute spirits under the light of the moon in order to avoid law enforcement. And from this, the word moonshine came to be, becoming a colloquial or slang term for unlicensed or untaxed whiskey or other distilled spirits made from grains. So again, it wasn't that the drink itself was banned, but rather that you needed a federal license to produce it, and the US government wanted to tax it. Now, in an effort to win public support and also to keep those taxes flowing in, the government's going to start this campaign against moonshine to sort of promote it as something that's exceptionally dangerous. Stories abound of moonshine being tainted with gasoline, turpentine, lye, iodine, snakeheads, heavy metal particles, you name it, which could result in blindness, paralysis, sickness, or death. In 1899, the Kansas City Journal stated that moonshine was so dangerous that it made the man who drinks it, quote, want to fight his grandmother. Now, to be clear, this wasn't just propaganda, as some of this was actually true. Let's start with the dangers of consuming poorly made or adulterated moonshine. Now, according to the newspaper archives of the Library of Congress, I was able to find articles confirming that people did indeed die from it, often drinking it, taking ill, and succumbing a few days later. While I couldn't find a single instance of anyone going blind from consuming moonshine, I did find articles of moonshiners being blind. Now, whether that was from the moonshine, I can't say. Of course, not everyone agreed that moonshine was even dangerous. Even the St. Paul Pioneer Press reported that, quote, moonshine whiskey is the finest liquor made in this country. It is perfectly free from chemical adulterations that are put upon the market by manufacturers. So is moonshine actually as dangerous as the government made it out to be? While, as discussed, there were isolated instances of people dying, it was nowhere near the pandemic that the government made it out to be. Based on the evidence, it appears to me that it was less about a concern over public health and more about taxes the government was missing out on. And if the newspaper articles are any indication, far more people died in the raiding of moonshine stills than were ever killed by moonshine itself. As for exploding distilleries, yes, this was an actual thing. Honestly, I was surprised by how many articles I found on distilleries exploding. It seems that this was an annual occurrence, often caused by a variety of circumstances. In one instance, an engineer at a distillery in South Carolina had his head blown off by an exploding boiler. In another, a worker at the Monarch Distillery was swept out of the burning building post-explosion by a tidal wave of ruptured whiskey tanks, carrying him through a hole in the wall and 75 feet away from the warehouse, saving his life. It must be noted, however, that all these exploding distilleries are professional, permitted commercial enterprises, yet they still experience distillery explosions. As such, one could safely assume that illegal stills hidden in the wilderness, manned by amateurs, likely experienced their own share of explosions as well, but were simply never reported. One way the government attempted to curb the dangers of adulterated alcohol was passing the Bottle in Bond Act of 1897. This act set a series of requirements on the production of American distilled spirits. For example, spirits had to be the product of one distillation season and one distiller at one distillery. They must also be bottled and stored in bonded warehouses under U.S. government supervision for no less than 4 years. If the producers met these quality standards, they would be allowed to label their spirits as bonded, and customers would know that they're purchasing a safe, pure, and authentic product. In many ways, this was one of the first consumer protection acts in United States history. It should also be noted that this was not actually required. However, any distiller that agreed to abide by the strict regulations in order to have their product designated as bonded would receive tax breaks from the US government. So now we'll turn our attention to Red Dead Online, and we'll see how historically accurate the Moonshiner Role actually is. Well, let's begin with the startup costs. In the game, unlocking the role cost 25 gold bars, or in Red Dead Online cash equivalent, about $625. I was able to find a 1905 article from the Yorkville Inquirer that breaks down the cost of a moonshining operation. According to it, a whiskey making outfit can be started for only $50. This means that Rockstar is charging us 1,250% more than the historical cost to get our operations underway. One of the first missions in the Moonshiner Role is to raid a competitor's still, which is historically accurate for the period. I was able to confirm this by scouring through the archives, where evidence abounds of rival moonshiners fighting each other over territory. Some moonshiners even cleverly worked to put legitimate, law-abiding distilleries and bars, which by the way many at the time called dispensaries, out of business by partnering up with prohibitionists. While this may seem counterintuitive at first, it was really a genius move, as it reduced legal competition, thereby creating greater demand for illicit moonshine. One newspaper realized this and called it out by writing, quote, "The purpose is plain. The moonshiners and blind tigers want more freedom to do business, and the prohibitionists simply want to get rid of the dispensary." As such, some moonshiners help fund prohibition to eliminate legal rivals and drive up demand for their product. Alright, spoiler alert. As you get into the Moonshiner Role, you learn that Maggie's scarred face comes from enforcement agents throwing her into a burning building. While I could find no evidence that such an incident ever historically occurred, there were certainly violent clashes between enforcement agents and moonshiners, leading to combatants being killed on both sides. If the archives are any indication, such confrontations were commonplace, with the majority of bloodshed seen when raiding illegal stills deep in the woods. Of course, it's not just the moonshiners you need to worry about up there. Just saying. Some newspapers were sympathetic to the moonshiners, with one stating that, quote, "wholesale arrest of moonshiners is causing much unfavorable comment about town." The same paper goes on to state that the arrests were made indiscriminately by drunken marshals, in many cases the fees, levied by the court and a portion of which was paid to the officer, being the only incentive. As such, the hostility and violence between the two sides is historically accurate. I also wanted to mention that, to my own surprise, I came across several articles where groups of female vigilantes actually raided local stills, smashed the liquor, and destroyed their equipment. These women were part of the Women's Christian Temperance Union, better known as the WCTU, a female religious organization whose primary purpose was to combat the influence of alcohol on families and society. Their most famous motto was, "Lips that touch liquor shall not touch ours." Deal. Moving on. One oddity I found in the Moonshiner Role was that Rockstar did not include random raids on players' moonshine shacks from rival operations or revenue agents. Now, to me, this seems like a pretty major oversight, especially considering that in the trader role, your camp gets raided from time to time. Another issue I noticed was that even if you invest into your operation by constructing a bar in the basement of your moonshine shack and have it packed with clientele drinking your liquor, you don't actually earn any money. Now, at first I thought this might be a glitch, but then realized that we're just getting hosed. This would be an easy fix for Rockstar, so I hope they address this in the future. Another oddity I came across was that when transporting the liquor, apart from a canvas cloth, it wasn't hidden at all. Historically, moonshine was cleverly transported to avoid suspicion. According to one newspaper of the time, quote, "No one would suspect the innocent-looking load of cotton rolling down the road of containing moonshine hidden somewhere down amongst those flaky bales." It continues by saying that, quote, "A load of potatoes may be equally as guilty, and wagons of corn, cottonseed, hay, or any other kind of produce or grain all lend a hand to aid the moonshiner in getting his goods to market." As for additions to improve the Moonshiner Role, apart from income-producing bars and the possibility of random raids, Rockstar should allow us to bribe revenue agents so they turn a blind eye to our operations. This might be seen in agents sort of waving us through checkpoints or tipping us off a few minutes before a raid, if those are added. If revenue officers succeed in their raid, give us the opportunity to even steal our equipment back. Something that actually happened in the historical record when 12 moonshiners, quote, "broke open the railroad depot at Calhoun and retook a distilling apparatus which was captured by the revenue men in Gordon County." Rockstar should also allow players to invest in better jugs and wagons to limit the loss of moonshine on bumpy roads. They should also allow us to purchase boats in order to complete large deliveries to different ports around the map. We should also be allowed to set up multiple moonshining operations simultaneously and set up contracts with saloons across the map to supply them with liquor. Or, perhaps once a week, even give player posses the option to fight over territory, winning the contracts to supply those saloons with moonshine over the next 7 days and collect those daily profits in the meantime. But as far as those well-meaning WCTU ladies, I'm fine if you just leave those out.